Hello, everyone, and you're very welcome to the National Crops Forum. It is the, I suppose, the first time we're doing it online as I suppose, due to COVID and not being able to meet in person. So look, you are very welcome to the forum, and hopefully you can stay with us for the next hour, and it's great to see there's so many people signed in already. Look, I suppose this year has been a very difficult year for tillage farmers. Started off with a very difficult back end in terms of trying to get crops planted. We then followed into a wet January and February, and then even though it was a good spring to get crops in, followed into a summer, a late spring, and a summer drought, if you like. And now we're, put the tin hat on it, we're into a very difficult harvesting conditions now. So look, and all in all, it's been a very tough year. But look, there's not a huge amount of positives to take out of it, apart from the fact, I suppose, that there has been, all the various different weather that we've had across the year. It's given us a bit more information in terms of varieties that we plant and crops and rotations that we practice on farms. And I think, again, we've seen this year that where farmers have put in more diverse varieties, and they have a more diverse rotations or different crops on their farms, they've been able to spread the risk that little bit more widely and reduce or maybe soften the blow of poor weather this year. So to give you a bit of a lineup, this evening we're joined by John Joe Byrne from the Cereal Testings Division in the Department of Agriculture to discuss winter cereals. And then we're going to be joined by Tim O'Donovan of CTech, who's going to talk about the new varietal tolerance and resistance to BYDV. And finally, Shay Phelan from Teagasc is going to talk to us about designing a profitable rotation, because again, I think that's a very important aspect of what people are trying or should be trying to do. So look, we're going to run through each of the presentations in turn. They're going to take between 12 and 15 minutes each. It's not a lot of time, or so the speakers will tell me at least anyways, but we'll try to get through it as best they can. So during all of the speeches, all of the presentations, we are encouraging you to ask questions that come to you during the talks. So what we will try and do is we'll try and answer as many of them as we can towards the end of the session. So you can ask the questions simply by tapping on the Q&A at the top right of your mobile app, or at the bottom of your screen if you're looking at this in using a PC. So just type in your questions and hit send, and they'll be collated there in the background, and we can have a look at them from there. The webinar is being recorded and it will be put up on the Teagasc Crops YouTube website tomorrow. So you can go back and review some of the sections if you missed something or you want to go over it again. So with that, I'm going to invite John Joe Byrne to share your screen and turn on your video, John Joe, and we can make a start from there. Okay, John Joe. So
okay, thank you, Michael.
Share your screen and we go from there.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much, Michael. We'll give you a quick run through. As Michael said, we've a limited time frame this evening, so at the start, we'd like to say that you should check the recommended lists for all the finer detail on varieties that you may choose to grow this year. The winter barley list is published already, and we hope to publish the winter wheat and winter oats next week. Okay, so just before we go into the individual crop types, I suppose just to have a bit of a discussion on how do people choose their variety, or as Michael said, probably more appropriately a panel of different varieties to manage your risk. I suppose yield was the top line and is still the top line on the recommended list, but it's important that we look beyond it because it's not the only factor when it comes to choosing a variety. It is important in that it pays the bills, but we need to think of what risk we're taking to get that yield and how much it's going to cost us to grow that crop. So I suppose we all know this, no variety ticks all the boxes. So it's very important that you choose that suits your individual location, the risks that you've had to deal with in the past. So you consider those risks and make an informed decision based on what you consider to be the most important characteristics for your particular farm. So market, maybe feed, or if a premium contract, you may need to not even have a choice. But in those cases, it's important to use the recommended list to tailor your agronomy package and know what you're facing into for the season. So straw strength, pretty obvious in certain parts of the country, is probably more of an issue in southern regions and storm-prone areas. Disease resistance as well is another issue that's becoming more relevant with decreasing fungicide actives and reduced efficacy, but it's important to remember that varietal resistance is not guaranteed. Populations are continually changing, so we need to examine our crops carefully, particularly for the likes of yellow rust in the spring, and treat what we see. Grain quality, pretty obvious, important particularly for some of the premium contracts. Okay, winter wheat. This year we had 8 recommended list trial sites, 3 department centres and 5 on farm, 16 varieties in the trial and 3 candidates. The 3 disease observation trials there with no fungicide, we got some very useful information from those, and we'll go through those in later slides. We decided this year at our department centres not to use Bravo, given that it won't be available commercially next year. So we got some useful data from that. Okay, the proverbial busy slide. Just these are our 3 candidates here. So you have Skyscraper, Inciter, and Chevinon. Skyscraper, a good yield overall, but you can see under the high septoria pressure sites, it came under some pressure to perform. It is susceptible to septoria. Pretty good on yellow rust. Inciter, little bit more consistent. Its weakness would be sprouting. Chevinon there, you can see it just didn't perform. It didn't like the conditions that 2020 threw at it. So there are 3 candidates. We'll be deciding those in the next few days and publishing our winter wheat recommended list next week. A little bit more detail on the pedigrees. Again, most of these slides are for review later, either when you review the video or if a PDF is published in the coming days. This is data from the Back Weston trial site. It was a drought-prone and yellow rust-prone trial site. 100 equals 7.74 tonnes. That was in our treated trial. The treated trial is indicated by the blue bars, and the orange bars you can see there are the untreated fungicide yields. So you can see in a yellow rust situation, the likes of Costello there is performing very well. It's living up to its good yellow rust ratings, whereas some of the others like JB Diego, Bennington, Thorpe are under more pressure. A septoria trial site down in the south of the country in Ballydoran Farm. You can see there pretty much a role reversal for Costello. Its septoria resistance, weakness there is shown up, and the likes of Thorpe, Graham performing better under a high septoria pressure. You can see the risk we're taking with these growing wheat in Irish conditions. We're very dependent on our fungicides at the minute, and it's just something to bear in mind. There isn't any variety there that will survive without fungicide. They will all succumb eventually. Some will hold on for longer than others, but they will all eventually be pretty much destroyed by septoria. Okay, moving on to winter barley. We had 7 recommended trial sites, 3 at our department centres plus 4 on farm. We had 20 varieties in the recommended list trial this year. When we reviewed the data, we didn't make any additions to the 2021 recommended list. Again, the disease observation trials, no fungicide. We got some very good Rhynchosporium data this year at our Ballydoran site. And again, we got some good lodging data. The Bravo, again, was left out of the tank at the department managed centres. It was a pretty low pressure Ramalaria season, so maybe we didn't get as much info as we would have liked from that. Again, a busy slide here, just showing you the 3-year performance and giving you some background on the pedigrees of the variety for review over the coming days. This is how the varieties performed across the sites this year. Again, these were our candidates. When we looked across the 3 years, none of them beat the 99 or the 100 for yield, and none of them had anything particularly special in terms of their agronomic characteristics. So we decided not to add any varieties to the recommended list for the coming season. You can see down here, these ones here, these will be potential candidates for the coming season. KWS there. Tim will go into more detail on that in his presentation. It's the BYDV tolerant variety, did 100 this year. Good KPH, early developing, so we'd just be wary about sowing it too early. But a good, useful addition to our package. Hopefully will continue to perform and be recommended next year. Likewise with some of the hybrids there, the SY varieties, and an interesting 2-row variety there, KWS Tardis, yielding well this year. Okay, this is the winter barley recommended list for 2021, published. Most of you will have seen this already, just gone through some of the major changes. Bazooka, we marked it down a point to 6, and Casting and Valerie were also reduced in terms of lodging, again on the basis of the data from the Ballyround trial site. Pretty robust data. We've gone several years without good lodging data in barley, so it was an ill wind that didn't blow someone some good. So we got very, very, very robust data there. Rhynchosporium as well, the Ballyround site delivered there as well, and we marked Pixel down to a 4, which is a pretty significant drop, but it was very noticeable. You probably could have scored those trials from a helicopter. It was dramatic stuff. Casting and Valerie, again, were down a point or 2. Brown Rust, both Bazooka and Infinity, we dropped them a point. Winter Oats, we had 4 recommended list trials for 2023 at our department centres and 1 on farm. We lost the trial site due to the difficult weather conditions last back end. No candidates for recommendation this year. So when the recommended list comes next week, what you're most likely to see are changes in ratings, particularly mildew. We've seen some decrease in the resistance of certain varieties, the likes of Husky, Isabel, Delphin. They can expect a ratings downgrade when we review the data and make our decisions on the recommended list for release next week. Again, just an overview of how the varieties performed across the 4 sites. Kildalton had put in a pretty impressive performance there in the year that was in at 10.35. You can see the weather-related back Western would have really suffered for rain in 2020 from most of April through May into mid-June. It didn't get those showers that most of the southern counties did get, so it was really impacted on drought-wise. Barra put in a pretty good performance for a variety that's been on the list since '86. The others consistently performing. The RGT Southwark there is their true winter variety, performed very well this year, and Isabel put in a good performance also. Again, this is the 3-year data. Again, busy slide for review over the coming days. Okay, I just to acknowledge this work doesn't happen without the work of the colleagues in our division, Seamus Carney in Ballyround and his team, Eleanor and her team in Kildalton, and Angela Ryan and her team in Back Weston. And we'd also like to thank the farmers who host our on-farm trials. They're a very important part of our trialling system to trial varieties under commercial conditions. So that's it from me. Look forward to answering your questions.
John Joe, thank you very much for that. You're bang on time, so thanks very much for that. It's always good to kind of try and keep it on track. So look, what we're going to do is, and again, just to remind everybody out there, if you want to ask a question, just tap on the Q&A on your mobile. It's just up the top right-hand corner. Click onto that and type in your question and press send. So we'll try to get to all of those questions towards the end of the session. So I'm going to invite Tim O'Donovan. Tim, you might turn on your video and your speaker, and you might share your screen with us. You're going to give us a presentation on the BYDV tolerant varieties. John Joe mentioned it, Joe, which I think is one that you have in the works at the moment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Michael, for the invitation. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Fine crowd there gathering outside or wherever you are. So as Michael said, my name is Tim O'Donovan. I work with CTEC here in Waterford, and I was asked to present this evening on BYDV tolerance, new varietal technology. Sorry now, Michael, is that a full screen there?
That's good, yeah. You're right. Please go, Tim, yep.
Okay, I'll just press the, yeah, okay. So look, this evening, I'm going to cover just a reminder on BYDV, explain a little bit about the tolerance that we have in Joyu, and that's going to come in other varieties as well. Then I'll just go through a little bit of the performance of the varieties over the last number of years in specific BYDV trials, but also in the Irish Department of Agriculture trials and our own CTEC trials. Then just a couple of tips on the agronomy or what to watch out for some of these BYDV tolerant varieties, and a little bit on the future developments and what's coming down the line. And look, as I said, like there's a lot to cover here in 10 or 12 minutes. But as Michael said, the presentation will be recorded, and anyone can contact myself directly in CTEC or go on our website. We will have information on this technology available. I suppose, look, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge John Miles, who's the KWS Product Development Manager, and John has shared the information from the United Kingdom and France on the BYDV work that they've carried out, which is very relevant to what I'm going to talk about. So look, first of all, not to teach people how to, about BYDV, but look, it is a very significant yield robber, certainly one of the bigger problems that I would come across in barley in our own multiplication in fields, but also out commercially. In terms of, a couple of reminders, and this is something just for what I'm going to speak about later, but BYDV is the main spreader, or the main vector is the grain aphid in Ireland. But the trouble about that is, over the last number of years, Teagasc have confirmed that the grain aphids are, partially tolerant or resistant to the pyrethroid sprays such as Karate Xeon, Desus, Sumi Alpha, etc. All of those under the family of the pyrethroids. So it's quite important now that we look at alternative management of aphids. I put the first point there into bold or cap locks, knowing the life cycle of aphids and what influences them, what triggers them, etc., is very important. And look, mea culpa, I mean, up until 2012, 13, I hadn't seen BYDV as a problem because we had such very good control and cheap, effective control, good value to the growers from the point of view of the pyrethroids. I think, look, some of the things that are quite important in the next 2 to 3 weeks, reducing the green bridge, and we've had a miserable harvest. It's been very tough since the middle of July for everyone involved in the arable industry, and certainly trying to reduce the green bridge will be more difficult this year, but it is a very necessary step for reducing BYDV, and probably the most important one from winter barley perspective, where it's the first crop into the ground, and it also is the highest risk crop from the point of view of aphids surviving in the stubble, being ploughed down, living around the soil and infecting the barley plant as it emerges from the seedling. Quite an important thing to think about. Choosing a suitable variety, look, we're very delighted in CTEC to be able to bring Joyu to the market. There's other varieties coming. We don't have exclusivity on the technology, but certainly it's a welcome development, I think, from a grower's perspective. I think then monitoring aphids and listening to the Teagasc bulletins and advice is going to be very important into the future. drilling date, I mean, it's going to be very hard to hold people back drilling this year, but certainly an appropriate drilling date is going to be important. And alternative chemistry to the pyrethroids, whenever they are available and on the market, I think will be an important thing. But all of this together is really, you know, an integrated pest management strategy for BYDV control. So look, quickly, what does the genes in BYDV tolerance varieties do? This is a slide courtesy of John Miles and KWS. So the variety, as you can see, the picture on the left is a variety with the YD2 gene involved in it. It's the same gene that's actually carrying or conferring the BYDV tolerance in Jayu, the variety that we have on the market this year. The little plants on the right that are actually yellow and stunted, they're just a standard barley, and you can see the infection levels on the left, or sorry, on the right versus the left. So this variety resistance is durable. It's been around since the 1950s. It's classically bred into the varieties through back crossing and all the techniques that the breeders use. And it's non-GMO, which some people have asked me about that already. It's a true tolerance, and I'll go through that in a few minutes, but certainly the tolerance genes does not affect neither the aphid, its life cycle, how it eats, how it breeds, etc. Neither does it actually affect the virus. So there's no impact on the virus. And this is something that's quite important in terms of durability of the resistance or the tolerance. There's very or no little effect of the virus on the plant with these genes in it. Certainly I'll go through that in the trials, and I'll show you some of that information. So look, one of the things that can cause a little bit of confusion, people talk about tolerance resistance. I know when you get into it really and truly, some scientists consider tolerance to be resistance, and the terms are kind of interchangeable. But look, from the perspective of true scientific definitions, resistance will impact on the aphid. Either the aphid can't bite the plant, it can't inject the saliva into it, or its digestive fluids that carry the virus, and neither can it actually, sometimes the aphids can actually die on a resistant variety. The virus can be impacted also in a resistant variety, whereas in a tolerant variety, the variety is just able to grow and yield normally without any impact on the aphid or any impact on the virus. In both cases, your yield is secured. There can be subtle differences in terms of how you manage them, but in general, that's the kind of difference between a tolerant or a resistant variety. Into the future, I suppose the bigger risk of resistance occurring in a resistant variety, and that's a kind of a mouthful, but certainly where you impact on the aphid or the virus itself, certainly nature will always try to overcome that and try to beat you. If you're able to tolerate the virus, tolerate the aphid, certainly, you know, there's no impact or there's no effect on nature to actually try and overcome that tolerance. So that's why I think the tolerance has lasted since so long in terms of how long it's been around. So this is the KWS, and these are very high pressure BYDV trials. They were infected aphids were applied to the crop. They were grown or multiplied up in the glass house. They were on little barley plants in the glass house. At the 2 to 4 leaf stage, the barley plants in the glass house with the aphids on them were carried out into the field. They were laid down between the rows of barley, and the aphids obviously would have spread then left and right into the barley rows. Very high pressure, but this is the sort of work that's required to prove or to demonstrate how these genetics work, okay? That's what it would have looked like last October. This was done in 2019. It was harvested in 2020. And the type of infection here was 40 to 80% in terms of how many plants they laid down on a plot. Also, I suppose just to be aware, the virus, all of the aphids in the glass house that were laid down on the crop actually carried the virus. They were proven to have the virus in them. So a lot of aphids don't carry virus, but certainly in this case, the aphids were all carrying the virus. 10 days after the plants were laid down, the crop was sprayed with a pyrethroid or an insecticide to actually control the aphids. So there was only 10 days that the aphids were active in the crop. Very quickly, this is the 80% infection, photographs taken on the 20th of April by John Miles. The 2-row barley on the left looks half decent, but when I show you the yield, you'll see what happened. The conventional 6-row in the middle is a variety called Funky that is in the UK. There was a huge effect of the BYDV on the plant establishment, and you can see the small little stunted plants there that I'm sure everybody has seen in their time out in fields with very severe BYDV infection. And there on the right hand side is your tolerant variety. It's a variety called Amistar, which is a parent variety of Joyu. Joyu is only available in Ireland and in France. Moving on to the business end of the season, how did it yield? You can see there the 2-row barley, a respectable yield of 8 tonnes to the hectare. When we had the aphids that were infected, the yield halved down to 4 tonnes to the hectare thereabouts. The 6-row, a little bit different, might be a little bit more able to take a bit of hardship generally, but certainly when you had the high pressure BYDV situation, the yield was halved again. But then on the right hand side, you have the tolerant variety, and in terms of how it protected in the very, very high infection levels with virus carrying aphids, you can see how the genetics work. And I suppose, look, that's the real important point to get across here, is that these genetics do work. Very high situations, the yield is protected, and that's what the grower is paying for in their investment when they're looking at a variety such as Joyu. I suppose, look, moving on to it then quickly, the performance over the last number of years of Joyu, it's done quite well in the official trials, in our seed tech trials. I would say it's certainly comparable to the conventional 6-rows that are on the market, be that Cosmos or Pixel at the moment. It's a solid agronomic package. It's susceptible, moderately susceptible to mildew. As John just said, it's quite early to head out. Now that can be a risk if you're sowing early, especially if you get late frosts in April, as we had in 1998 or 2008. But certainly in terms of harvest date, it can actually be harvested quite earlier. So people actually that might be a benefit in some cases. It's not a hybrid. People are sometimes confused about that. So it doesn't have those benefits that the hybrids carry. And I suppose, look, in terms of seed availability, because it was only in multiplication stage, there is limited seed available this autumn. Quickly, that's the performance over the last number of years. I suppose, look, for myself, the standout things with Joyu has been, number one, its grain quality. Number two, its straw stability, be that from brackling or lodging. And I suppose the other thing then is it's early to head, and it is moderately susceptible to mildew, which we've seen in our own trials in seed tech. Patsy Kyo looks after them expertly here in seed tech, but also with the Department of Agriculture trials. The BYDV tolerance, so what's it doing for people? I suppose, look, I suppose first of all, the seed industry is, excuse my duck, it's the timer. The seed industry is solving a problem for growers, but certainly I would say, look, policymakers need to give the seed industry a heads up, because we just can't breed these things overnight, okay? And certainly if we were told 10 years ago that there was going to be, this issue was going to, the terror was going to be banned, we would have had a lot more varieties on the market, okay? The BYDV tolerant varieties, they protect yield, especially in the high pressure situations, as I've shown. They work right throughout the winter. So, you know, compared to Ready Go to Terra, where we had a 6 or an 8 week window after sowing for protection, the BYDV tolerance works right through to the following July when you're cutting the barley. Okay, now that makes no difference, except in southern areas maybe, or coastal sites where you've got mild winters and where aphids can come in kind of January, February time of. So there's excellent peace of mind from the grower. And I suppose, look, after a difficult harvest, having good peace of mind is something that people want to have. They don't want to be caught cut off side on this. There is the tolerance works, whether it's a bird cherry aphid, whether it's a grain aphid, whether it's the different types of virus. And lastly, I suppose, look, if you have resistant aphids or suspect resistant aphids in your locality on your farm, this tolerance will work there as well, okay? And I suppose, look, it does not affect the aphid life cycle, which I've said already, or it does not affect the virus loading in a plant, and that will have some consequences. We would suggest to people to continue monitoring aphids because the feeding effects of aphids can be something worthwhile treating. Generally, I've seen over the last number of years, and in that trial that I've shown you where we had a halving of the BYD of the yield because of the BYDV, there was no feeding effects, even though there was a lot of aphids there originally and they would have flown in. There wasn't any real feeding effects there, okay? But it can be an issue in certain years. I would consider this to be a really good IPM tool. Something that we're going to be hearing a lot of under the new CAP 2020 rules, and especially where pyrethroid resistant aphids are expected. I think certainly that's where the BYDV tolerance varieties will actually really show their true colours. Maybe near a river, if you have a well on the farm, an abstraction area, they come into play there, maybe around houses, schools, etc. But in practice, I would say the BYDV tolerant varieties, they're unlikely to require a preventative aphicide, okay? Maybe if feeding damage is seen or expected, but unlikely, I think, in most cases. So look, I suppose, look, what are you looking out for? For high-risk BYDV situations, they're very suitable. But as John Joe suggested earlier on about the heading date, yes, early drilling, don't lose the run of yourselves in terms of drilling date, because there's other issues such as take-all, et cetera, that could cause issues there, okay? For the future developments, I think certainly all breeders are working hard in this area. As I said earlier on, we're delighted to have the variety Jayu, but certainly all the other breeders are working very hard. Within a number of years, you will see more and more tolerant and resistant varieties coming onto the market, such as one that's in the UK at the moment, Wolverine. There's 6-row barley in Ireland, as we've spoken about. They're certainly in France. They're coming onto the market in the UK. In the near term, I think you will see some 2-row interbarleys coming on. Certainly the hybrid barleys will have resistant genes coming as well. In the medium term, the breeders are working in spring barley and oats. I suppose, look, an academic question is how durable all of this resistance will be. But so far, the genes that we're carrying in Jayu have lasted 60 years, well, 70 years, 60 years. And I think they're going to last a while longer. And there are novel sources of genetic resistance to BYDV that the breeders are bringing in. So look, Michael, I might have gone over a little bit, but look, I'd like to thank people for their attention. And look, I hope you have a very successful drilling season in 2020, because by God, we needed a break after that miserable harvest. So thanks again.
Tim, thanks very much for that presentation. I think it's a very welcome development, given the fact that I suppose the direction of travel from European consumers and the EU, I suppose in a general sense, is towards reducing pesticide loads, if you like, and that will certainly help along those lines. So Tim, I might just get you to stop presenting there, if you would, and we're going to go straight away. And again, just a reminder, there's certainly some questions in here already, and which is great. So just keep throwing up your questions, and we'll try our best to answer them as towards the end of the session. So Shay, you are last up. If you wouldn't mind sharing your screen there, and Tim, maybe you might turn off your video. And Shay, I'm going to hand across to you.
Can you see that there now, Michael?
We surely can.
Okay. Again, good evening, everybody. And thanks for sticking with us so far. I'm just going to take you through a few slides here, just looking to see how we can reduce risk in our business, and certainly rotations are something that we can use to our advantage in that scenario. So if you take it, we all know from this year that it's been a very risky season. farming by its nature is a risky business. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to invest in risk management. We need to make sure that we reduce down that risk to our farm businesses as best we possibly can. We will never, ever do it completely because of the weather factor, but we can certainly reduce down other factors. So if we look at the 2020 harvest, that's just, well, I won't say finished, it's almost finished at this stage. Just a quick recap on what has happened this year and the impact that it's had. Obviously, weather factors dominated the harvest of the growing season of 2020. We started off with a very wet autumn in many places and followed on then into a very wet spring early in the spring. And then, you know, we had that drought in certain parts of the country, certainly from Kilkenny North up to the northeast. We had a substantial drought there through the months of April and May, which pretty much put a cap on yields on many crops. So again, it was something beyond our control. And then I suppose to put the real tin hat on it then, look, we've had a very broken harvest in terms of weather. So weather hasn't really played its part with the harvest either. So all the way through, you can see that weather has been a very big risk, or has had a big impact on the crops this year. What that's led to is a huge increase in the dependence on spring barley. We've seen and we'll look at the figures in a minute, we've seen a large increase in the area of spring barley planted this year. And back to levels that were probably there 10, 15 years ago. But yet the capacity that we have out there hasn't increased to match that. And obviously then we have, in many cases, we had reduced yields to start off with because of the drought situation, but we've also had reduced yields due to the weather we've had during the harvest, whether that be crops lost on the ground and what have you. And that's going to have an impact on income. So I suppose while we sit down now, and a lot of us reflect on the harvest that's there at the moment, one of the things we should ask ourselves now at this stage, what could we have done to avoid this? I know weather is a factor that we don't have any control over, but you should also ask, are we taking too much risk with our cropping strategies? Are we putting all our eggs in one basket, if you like? And if you look at the figures here, these are Department of Agriculture figures in terms of the crops grown this year. So the full bars, if you like, the coloured bars are 2019 harvest, and the hash bars are 2020 harvest. Blue is spring barley, green is winter barley, red is winter wheat, followed by spring wheat, and then we have oats at the very bottom on my right-hand side. So as you can see on one side of the graph here, we have a huge dependence on three crops: spring barley, winter barley, and winter wheat. And that's never ideal. If you take it that we have in around, I think the figures I got today were about 280, just north of 280,000 hectares of combinable crops in the country in 2020. Half of that was spring barley. So that puts a huge risk on the industry, and in some cases, even bigger risk on individual farms where the proportion of spring barley in the mix would have been very, very high. So that's a huge risk factor in the farming system. And when you top off winter wheat on top of that spring barley, you're up to nearly 175,000 hectares. And when you think about that, that has to be harvested in 2 to 3 weeks in the middle of August. And you're relying on the weather playing ball with you in that 2 to 3 weeks in August in order to get those crops harvested. And bear in mind, in some of the weather stations around the country, August is the second wettest month every year. So it's just putting a huge risk on your farm business by putting all your eggs, not in one basket, but certainly a lot of eggs in that basket. So we just need to de-risk ourselves a little bit. And while we kind of often look at break crops and see, we always talk about them, over a 2 or 3 year period. But this is the information from the Teagasc e-profit monitors that we did back in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And what I have here is I have the three popular cereal crops on top. So if winter wheat, winter barley, and spring barley, and then I have the three most popular break crops: winter oats, winter oilseed rape, and beans. And what this graph shows is that no single crop was most profitable in each of the 3 years, okay? So in any given year, there was a different crop most profitable. And likewise, at the other side, there was no crop that was least profitable in all of the 3 years. So basically what that tells you is that crops fluctuate and their performance fluctuates from year to year, which is largely without your control or outside your control. So if you look at 2016, winter wheat was the most profitable crop. 2017 was winter oilseed rape, and 2018 was winter barley. And 2018 was probably a little bit of a misnomer because of the drought and all the effects that it had in terms of grain price and straw price as well. But what's very interesting in this graph here, if you look at the red line there, which is spring barley, the spring feed barley in this situation, spring feed barley is probably on the low side of the margin in terms of the crops that are grown there. So I suppose hence the decline that we've seen over the last number of years in spring barley area in the country, although this year, because of weather conditions, it's gone back up again. So it is not the most profitable crop to grow out there, so we should be probably looking at alternatives. So the other thing that is probably impacting on our businesses as well and on the rotations is this drive for expansion and this demand for extra land, and we're going out renting land all over the country. And what can be seen from this, again from the eProfit Monitor data, is this is data from different farms in 2016. And what you can see here is that probably 75% of the farms in 2016 lost money on their rented land, okay? And in some cases, they lost substantial amounts of money on that rented land. And although 2017 was a better harvest year, again, quite a number of people lost money on rented ground in those years. And what that tends to do in a roundabout sort of way is that tends to encourage people to make the big bet and go for the likes of the crops that are going to yield most and perhaps give most money. And that in those contexts, you're looking at winter wheat and winter barley. So again, that kind of negates or goes against the thought of rotating around crops, because you're looking to back the favorite all the time, and we know favorites don't always win. So again, rented ground here, while it can help the business, we really need to ask, is it worth it? And they're just figures showing how many people actually made money and how little money they actually made in those 2 years. So again, the role of rented land has to be questioned here. Is it just for expansion, or is it actually contributing to the farm business? And is it allowing you to plan your rotations better? So in terms of planning for the future and planning in rotations, quite often, and what we're starting to hear already on the ground is a knee-jerk reaction to what's just happened in the last 12 months in terms of the crop growing season. So Tim and John Joe have already referenced the fact that many people are talking about going and sowing very early at this stage. That's not the way to go. You need to sit down, review performance over a period of time, not just in the last month or two. Okay, so you need to look and see how have crops or fields performed in different fields over a period of time. Then and only then can you decide what's a good rotation and get a good crop mixture in that regard. The 3 crop rule shouldn't be a challenge to most people. It should be well within most people's scopes to get the 3 crop rule out of the way and continue on then. The other thing we need to look at again, and when it comes to just stabilizing your income, is land improvements and poorly performing land. Again, these are a huge problem in many farms, whereby certain areas of certain fields or certain farms just don't perform, and yet we keep sowing them all the time with these expensive wheat and barley crops, because they're not cheap crops to grow. So we need to make sure that they are performing to their maximum. And obviously then you have to review your financials at the end of the year and see where we can make savings, where we can actually increase our output as well. And as I said in the previous slide, the role of rented land, I think, on a lot of farms really has to be questioned here, not only just from the financials, but also from the point of view of allowing you to improve your rotations. As you've seen in the last slide, very few guys made more than 500 euros a hectare, 200 euros an acre. Yet a lot of land out there is rented for around that sort of figure. So you're not going to try and rotate a crop around or put in break crops if they're not going to give you a yield on rented land. So you tend to, as I said before, put in the big yielding crops and hope for the best after that. Other options then in terms of stabilizing your income going forward is look at forward selling options. Now I know in 2012, quite a lot of us got stung, but look, there's always a buyer out there. And the one thing that it does allow you to do, it allows you to plan forward. Once you know what your potential yield or potential income is going to be from that field, you can then spend accordingly, and you can limit your spending then when you get to a certain level. Premium contracts, Tim and John Joe also mentioned those. Again, they should be something that shouldn't be rare on most farms. This should be common on all farms. They do offer you an opportunity to get an extra bit of money. Yes, some of them are a little bit of extra work, but you know, in cases like this year where supplies of these premium crops were scarce, they can be worth their weight in gold. So again, there are options out there. All you have to do is go look for them. Nobody's going to knock on your door with them. The other option that's out there, and again, I remember back to tillage conference back in a number of years ago, where we had a guy over from England, a farmer over from England, talking about forward purchasing inputs and particularly fertilizers. We tend to buy fertilizers in the spring when we need them, but in the UK they tend to buy them 6, 8, 10 months or even 12 months in advance of when they need them, whenever the market is at its lowest. So we should be looking for those opportunities out there to try and reduce down our input costs. So in terms of developing a successful rotation, it's very easy for me to sit down, and we did this, an example of this with the advisors and Teagasc advisors this morning, looking at how we develop a crop rotation. And the first thing that we should look at is choose crops that are suitable for your farm. Not all crops are suitable for all farms. Some crops like light land, some crops like heavy land. So we need to make sure that we pick crops that are going to suit that farm to give them the best opportunity to return an income for you. On top of all the agronomic issues that we should look at, the other one that's becoming more and more apparent out there as we go through is use crops to spread your workload. As you've seen this year, guys who are hugely exposed with winter wheat and spring barley are in an awful state the last couple of weeks trying to get those crops harvested. The guys who had winter barley followed by winter oilseed rape followed by winter oats and had maybe 30, 40, maybe even 50% of their harvest completed by the end of the first week of August, those guys are much more relaxed at the moment and have a lot of their crop in the bin already before the main harvest took off. The other thing about break crops that we have to be aware of is problem with weeds and diseases that they may or may not bring in, or there may be opportunities in those situations to control weeds or control diseases as well. So bear those in mind as well. The one issue, I suppose, that has cropped up every now and again with break crops is market oversupply. And certainly we would have seen that a number of years ago when the protein payment came in, where guys got into growing beans and peas because of the protein payment there. Suddenly we had an oversupply in the market and the price dropped. So the income that we thought we were going to get wasn't nearly as good. So it's just something to be wary of. And quite a lot of these niche markets are exactly that, they're niche. So we need to just be careful of that. The other thing in terms of rotation is look at your machinery that you have on the farm. Is it suitable to growing the crop that you're going to grow? Do you need to get in a contractor? And that can be a benefit too to reduce the workload on yourself. So I suppose, second last slide, Michael, if we're starting from scratch here at the moment in autumn and a guy is deciding what he's going to do, first thing is to start off from a good base. As I say, a good start is half the battle. Get your soil tests done. The next 2 weeks are an ideal time to get them done. You should have your results back by the time you start drilling. Okay. If you're in rotation of growing oilseed rape, I would suggest that you complete sowing that oilseed rape as soon as possible. We always hear the cases of the crops that were sown late that did well, but we never hear of the many cases that were sown late that don't do well. So for most guys, oilseed rapes probably should be finished at this stage, but there are probably a few guys in the southern half of the country who could still get away with it. John Joe, I think, mentioned it earlier on, drill a mixture of crops, but not only a mixture of crops, drill a mixture of varieties as well to spread ripening dates, disease profiles, lodging risk, all those types of risks. And in that way, you will help to reduce your risk and again, maybe stabilize your income. The guys have said it already, and I couldn't say it anymore. Beware of this early planting, and I'm afraid of this knee-jerk reaction that a lot of guys are going to get into based on what happened last year. So just beware of those risks that are there. And finally, then, just when you are drilling, and it always crops up every year when we're drilling, guys wondering what's the seed rate, what you'll be using. Very difficult to know what your seed rate should be if we don't know the 1,000 grain weight. That's the best guide we have to then go and calculate what your optimum seeding rate is. And if you know what your optimum seeding rate is, that's going to give you an optimum plant population, which gives you the best chance to get the yields that you need to get. So finally, then, just to conclude that, as we say, weather is a risk factor, but there are others out there. We need to reduce those risk factors. There's no crop out there at the moment which is going to outperform all the other crops every year. Every crop has its up years, every crop has its down years. We need to diversify away from them. And as I say, crop rotation can increase income in any given year, and it can also reduce the risk. So from my point of view, I think we should be looking at more diverse range of crops out there, and that in its over time will help to stabilize incomes on farms. So that's it, Michael. I'll stop it at that. if that's okay.
Shay, thanks very much. You're slightly over time, but well done. That's pretty good going. Can I just ask you to stop sharing your screen? And
Gladly.
Tim and John Joe, you might come back online to me as well. So we have a good few questions there for you guys. They're after coming in from people watching in this evening. So I'm just going to go down through it relatively quickly. So can I ask anyone who's asking or answering a question, keep it brief because there's a good few questions to go through. Okay, so John Joe, first one to you. Why did winter oats do so badly this year in Back West in comparison, because it was after beans in comparison to Kildalton, which was after spring barley?
Yeah, I think we can put that down probably to the soil type and weather during April and May and into June. Kildalton would be a heavier soil and it probably got 60, 70 millimeters of rain in that those months, whereas Back Weston was getting 2 and 3 mils once a fortnight. So it's purely down to weather, I would say, and soil type. The soil would be a lot lighter in Back Weston and less water retention in it. So it's probably not an ideal oat site in the year that was in it.
Okay, thanks, John Joe. Tim, across to you. The question here is, why was drilling date so important? Would soil temperature and environmental temperature be a better risk reducing factor?
Yeah, look, we generally use drilling date as a kind of a proxy for the weather that you're going to face in the autumn. So like obviously the earlier you drill, the warmer the soil will be, the greater the temperature will be, the faster, the more aphids are going to fly into a crop, the bigger the infection risk. At the flip side then, sowing date is used as a kind of a proxy for how spring growth will be affected. Generally, the earlier sown will have a increased risk of developing quicker in the autumn, Michael. So yeah, it's a valid comment. I mean, the apps that are developed for predicting BYDV impact generally work on T-sums, which is accumulated day degrees above 3 degrees Celsius, and that's an air temperature. Soil temperature, I don't think come into it too much there. Maybe for T-sum for nitrogen, excuse me, but certainly for aphids, it's the air temperature is quite important. But we use generally with people, people are making snap decisions. They don't have time to be thinking about checking about temperatures and stuff, and we use drilling days as a proxy to give us a good rule of thumb. That's why we use it. Okay,
and to work from one year to the next.
Yeah.
I'm just we'll go back to John Joe here again. John Joe, a question there about fusarium. Do you have any figures on fusarium on seed and the effectiveness of seed treatments? And maybe Shay, you might want to comment maybe afterwards, potentially.
Yeah, I don't have access to the seed testing laboratory data. Maybe Tim, I think Tim might have been at a meeting during the week. He might be able to comment on it. But just going on what we're seeing in the trials, the winter wheat and the spring barley has high levels of fusarium coming through in the samples. I think the winter barley got away okay. Maybe Tim or Shay would like to talk on product choice or what their opinions are.
Yeah, well, just, we had a conversation yesterday with the seed laboratory, your colleagues, John Joe, and up to the last week, the seed samples that were coming in were generally within normal ranges. But in the last week, 10 days, the samples that were coming in, I suppose crops that were harvested since the 2 storms, there has been slightly higher levels of fusarium, both mycodochium and true fusarium species recorded. That was the general comment given to us by the laboratory. In our own case, our own seed, we were very lucky. A lot of our seed actually came into Seed Tech earlier on in the season, winter barley, winter wheat, winter oats. And to be honest, it's a joy. It's really nice to go down and look at it in the store today. It's nice and bright sample. Some of the later sown stuff or later harvested stuff then, I mean, look, as I'm speaking to you, there's lorries passing by outside the weighbridge of spring oats and spring beans and spring rape and spring wheat today. And certainly it's a little bit, it's definitely a duller sample of grain. We don't have any results back on the later harvested stuff ourselves. All I can say is that the dressings will be applied appropriately to the level of disease on it. I mean, and we treat it very, very seriously. Sorry, that's a wrong word, but we take the business of treating the seed seriously in terms of the loading that's required for the disease that's there. But at the moment, I think the seed trade are very experienced in this, and we will be looking at germination, viability, but also we'll be looking at the different fusarium that are on a seed and getting appropriate dressing for that. Okay,
Tim, thank you. One for yourself, Shay, just a question on aphid resistance. Any update on that? You might maybe comment if you know as regards the aphid counts that are out there at the moment. And just finally, just to round off that particular question and square it off, is there recommendations, any difference now in terms of pyrethroid resistance?
No, I suppose is the short answer, Michael. There's no real change in terms of the resistance profile. Like we would have said this time last year, our best IPM strategy is to delay drilling as long as is feasible for a lot of farmers, so that we reduce the risk, or not that we reduce the number of applications that we're going to need. So ideally, if we're drilling in October, we should only need one application of a pyrethroid. Once we apply a second or even a third in some cases pyrethroids, the risk of developing resistance increases dramatically. So from that point of view, we need to manage the crop as best we possibly can in terms of drilling day to try and reduce that risk of developing resistance. In terms of numbers that are out there at the moment, I don't have any to hand. We do have, as people know, a suction tower in Oak Park where we're hoping to monitor flight over the next coming months, but I don't have any figures on that as of yet.
Okay, thank you very much, Shay. Shay, actually, I'm going to come back to you again because it's a figure to do with crop profitability, and the comment is, shouldn't you take into account the previous crop into account in terms of the profitability there, and shouldn't that be taken more into consideration when we are considering planning a rotation?
Absolutely. What I showed there on the slide were just straight net margin from those crops. And if you take a rotation or a break crop rotation into account, it's the overall profitability of that rotation that counts. So the benefit that you get from subsequent crops after your break crop can often negate the lack of profitability, if you like, or the poor profitability of that break crop. And I know we've presented at a different forum before, looking at the performance of rotations versus continuous cereals, and depending again on your soil type and your situation and your capacity to grow the crops, more often than not, where farmers have rotations in place and good rotations in place that suit the farm, those tend to be the most profitable farms.
Okay, thanks, Shay. Quick one for you, John Joe. Straw yields are generally very poor this year, but grain yields are generally pretty satisfactory, especially in the case of winter oats. Do you have any observation about that?
I suppose the grain size has compensated for the lack of a plant population. I suppose oats, in fairness, the late John Finnan would have done a lot of work on oats, and his view was that it always sort of self-regulated in terms of the number of grains per meter squared. So it's probably a function of the plant compensating in terms of actual 1,000 grain weights, and maybe more grains per ear on the oats, in particular the panicles. Less abortion on the panicles.
Okay.
Can I add a comment to that, Mike?
No evidence to back it up.
Can I add something to Michael? Yeah, just to let people be aware that winter barley seed this year, the 1,000 grain weight is quite big, a lot bigger. We are dressing at the moment, and it was something was brought to our attention in the last few days. So for people calculating their seed rates, certainly in terms of winter barley, 1,000 grain weights are a lot higher than previous years. And I think that will back up what the question there from the Northeast that from the Midlands is that winter oats did well, because I think 1,000 grain weight's a lot bigger than normal.
Crops filled well, Tim, I suppose. That's
absolutely, no question about it.
And Tim, while you're there, just a quick question from you. It's probably coming from somebody down Waterford direction. What is the ideal timing for planting Joe?
I suppose, look, what we would say is it allows you to drill whatever your normal drilling date is and reduces the risk of BYDV in the crop. I suppose that's the whole idea behind it. It's a conventional 6-row, so it wouldn't have the hardiness or the robustness of a hybrid. So maybe the later drilling dates after the 3rd week of October becomes a little bit more risky. And certainly I think from the middle 3rd week of September, certainly onwards, I mean, I hate giving a drilling date. You know, it really, you know, people have to make their own mind up in their own area. But certainly, kind of from the 3rd week of September onwards, we think that Joyo would be able to certainly be able to give a good yield in terms of the BYDV risk. But as I said before, you got to remember there's take all, there's heading date, there's other things that can impact on yield. It's you know, it's not a panacea. It's just got BYDV tolerance in it.
Okay. A bit of a thorny one here for you, Shay. It's not going to be easy to answer, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. So the comment is, the real problem is not rented land, it's the cost of inputs.
Yeah, it's a good observation, Michael, but I think there's no getting away from it. The 3 big costs on farm, if taking individual costs on farm at the moment, are the cost of land, cost of machinery, and cost of fertilizer. And generally, the fertilizer tends to be the smallest of the 3. Okay, and I know people out there are renting land, and they're renting land for various different reasons, and in many cases, it does help to spread work, or to spread the cost of machinery, and you're able to put it out over a bigger area. But I mean, the figures that I showed you there from the 2016 and 2017 harvest don't lie. Rented land can be a millstone around your neck if you're not careful. And the cost of this renting year out, which I think is you know, getting into more risk. But look I take it there are guys out there who are in a situation who they rent land and they works very well for them and more luck to them. But there are also quite a lot of guys out there who are renting land and starting to walk away from it because the cost of it is getting too high.
Okay. So look, our time is actually up, and the hour has flown by really fast. And what I really want to do is want to say a huge thank you to John Joe, to Tim, and to Shay for giving their presentations this evening and being so honest and forthright and quick to answer, I suppose, on the questions there this evening. So thanks very much, and certainly thanks very much to the participants who threw in some of the questions there. It's always great to get some good questions, because if the chances are, if you're thinking about it, somebody else is as well. So we try to answer all the questions. I think we got around to most of them, but if there's a few we have missed, come back to us again or come back to us locally. Look, I'm not going to try and sum up the excellent information was given this evening, but I just would like to add a number of points to it just at the very end. You know, there's lots of farmers out there currently experiencing, you know, trying to finish off the harvest. They are experiencing a difficulty, I suppose, in trying to make ends meet in terms of cash flow. And look, it's tough times out there, and some farmers are finding it very tough going at the moment. So what I want to say is that our team of advisors are available to farmers to help them out in planning rotations, as Shay was talking about, or any of the agronomic decisions that are there, or to help out in terms of planning their cash flow or their financial needs over the next number of weeks and months ahead, because it is going to be difficult. So look, I certainly encourage, and all my colleagues will certainly be encouraging farmers to pick up the phone and have a chat. Because I suppose, as the saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. So it's something we really need to try and encourage as much as we can. So the final thing I just want to say is I just want to remind you that the second part of our National Crops Forum takes place next Thursday at the same time at 6:30 in the evening. So Thursday, September the 17th, this day week. You do need to register for that again. And you can find the registration on teagasc.ie/events. So look, our time is up. We're a little bit over, but I just want to thank our speakers again. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week, hopefully at 6:30. Thank you very much. Goodbye.